You're asking yourself, how can I ensure that I answer the question? Now, this is something which I've been going on and on about. You don't just have to produce a good essay, you have to produce an essay which answers the question. Because even if you produce a good essay which perhaps you've memorized at home and then just regurgitate onto the page, if that doesn't answer the question which the exam is asking, you're not going to get the good marks which you deserve. So, in your introduction, you need to be providing an orientation of your argument, question, and opinion. So this is just really going to be bringing the marker immediately to your ideas and your response. You also need to give an introduction to your text, specifically unrelated related material, which your marker might not specifically understand, or obviously they probably have come across it before, but they might not have a detailed knowledge of the specific elements of that text. So you want to orient them to that text. You also want to be listing the points of your essay, and this allows the marker as they're reading to follow your argument, and as they read through to have a better understanding of what direction your argument is heading in. We then get to the body of the essay. Now, it's a bit interesting to think of the body of your essay as the vertebrae or the backbone. So basically what you have is all the paragraphs, which are the specific vertebrae, making up the one unit of the back and providing what we call a pathway of proof. So this means that each paragraph will address a new theme. So this means you're not constantly repeating yourself, and you're always ensuring that you have fresh material and quotes with which you can use to impress the marker. The body paragraphs have a very strict, formulaic, and repetitive structure, and this is going to lead to a really clear argument. Using sophisticated language within this structure will ensure that it's not going to get boring for the marker to read, so you really get the best of both worlds, combining a formulaic structure but also one which is made interesting through descriptive language, techniques, and really just a sophisticated language tone. You want to be including 1 to 4 quotes per paragraph and making sure that these each provide different techniques. So if you're using 4 quotes in one paragraph, you make sure that all 4 of those quotes weren't metaphors, for example. You'd make sure 1 was a metaphor, 1 a simile, 1 a personification, and 1 alliteration, for example, to show the marker that you have a really across-the-table grasp of different language techniques. You then need to make sure that you link up your paragraphs, and this is a difficult skill which we're going to be looking at in our later videos. We then get to the conclusion. Now, as we've said before, the conclusion isn't merely a summary of your essay, but instead it really wraps up and brings to the end a really solid argument through combining this into one succinct paragraph. So what you want to do is to be able to show what your argument is and then prove your philosophical point through backing up your theme with specific references to your text. The texts are merely evidence and examples in your main argument. So what's really important to think of is your essay isn't actually an essay on your texts. It's instead an essay on your area of study with your text just as evidence in proving your point. You want to make sure you leave the reader with a message. For example, the importance of belonging to society. For example, if my area of study was the migrant experience, my end of the day message might be the difficulty which migrants have coming to Australia and the way in which I think their experience should be improved. So really just providing a sophisticated way of ending an essay. You also need to demonstrate, perhaps if it's relevant, how the theme has changed over time. This might be particularly relevant if you're looking at texts which are set across very different time periods. So you really need to demonstrate the way in which perhaps belonging has or hasn't changed for humans in your different texts. You also need to provide your personal response. However, this doesn't necessarily mean including I in your vocabulary. It just means stressing to the marker your argument. So text type questions are the third and final part of the lesson today, which we're going to be examining. There's nothing worse than getting into an exam and understanding the content, having a really good essay prepared, but not being able to answer the question. And obviously the most common scenario for this is if you get into the exam and they're asking you for an alternative text type. To avoid being surprised by exam questions, you therefore need to be familiar with common essay text types, and we're going to be looking at a couple of these now. So these include feature articles, speeches, and interviews. Now, when you approach these, you're not approaching them from scratch. What you're doing is taking your essay and then just adapting it to the form of that particular text. So, the first idea is an essay as a feature article. A feature article is something which presents an argument or opinion. So it's not just, say, a factual news report, but it's really an opinion piece which allows you to demonstrate your view to the reader. This obviously therefore means that it has a less formal structure than an essay and is really very conversational in tone. So it's going to be using expression which you might have steered clear of for your essay, but once you get to the feature article is completely acceptable. This means, for example, you might be referencing popular culture or current events. Anything which is really going to ensure that at the end of the day, you demonstrate that your feature article is interesting, is going to be appealing to readers, and that readers who are picking up a magazine are going to want to be reading that article. It might be using things like statistics or quotes to back up your argument. So it's really good when you go into exams to have a basic bank of these sort of things, which you can be pulling out on the day based on the text type. It also has a tone which suits whatever publication or audience you're writing for. Obviously, you won't know this until you get into the exam, but you need to be adapting this. So for example, if it's a feature article for a scientific journal, it's going to be a very formal style. However, if you're perhaps writing it for a magazine which people just read for leisure, it's going to be a more conversational and interesting style. So you just need to adapt based on your publication. Essays as feature articles also include a catchy pun or alliteration title. Now, this might seem a little cheesy, however, this is what they're looking for. It might seem a bit cringeworthy for you to write it down, but this is the sort of thing which the marker wants to demonstrate that you have an awareness of this text type. You also then want to include a subtitle, which summarizes what your story is actually about. You then want to be going into perhaps a picture with a caption or a pullout. However, obviously in an exam, you're not going to be getting out your colored pencils and drawing a picture, but if perhaps you're doing this feature article as an assignment at home, you're going to be including a picture in that. So the structure of it, firstly, you're going to be introducing your argument. This is going to be through summary, message, or an anecdote, and you want this at the very top of your page and in bold. Paragraphs 2 and 3 then go on to state and explain in the state, explain, support format. So this means that you're presenting both sides of the issue. However, you are leaning towards your side, but this doesn't mean lying. You still want to be sticking to the facts and ensuring that your response is accurate. In the fourth paragraph, you then are giving only your viewpoint, which is going to be backed up with statistics or quotes or textual evidence. Anything which really demonstrates that your view is right and that is going to make the marker believe that you know what you're talking about. In the fifth paragraph, you're going to be looking at the consequences of the issue for society and future development. So as we've discussed, taking your area of study and looking at it on a broader and more significant scale. And you then want to be closing on an ironic or interesting statement. Essays as speeches are also another text type which you can be given. And these are obviously going to be something that you're more familiar with based on the fact that perhaps at school you've had assessments which are speeches, you've been doing speeches in assembly, anything like that. So you can use what you know and draw on this to create an essay in the style of a speech. So a speech is something which presents an argument. So obviously your argument is going to be whatever your significant area of study theme is. It also has topic sentences to introduce points and keywords. So just like you would in an essay, but you're translating this into a more conversational and rhetorical speech structure. This means you're going to be using anecdotes, statistics, and quotes. Just like in the feature article, things which make your essay in speech form more real, not just feeling like an English essay. You also want your tone to be conversational. So you're going to be using things like rhetorical questions, pauses, repetition, and a mix of first and second person language. And this is really going to provide you with an accurate and detailed speech style, which is also appealing and interesting. So imagine that you're sitting listening to that speech. What sort of techniques can you use to make it more interesting for the listeners? You also want a takeaway message, just like in all the other areas we've looked at. The final area which you could be asked to write in is an interview. Now, the purpose of an interview is to entertain, it could be professional, or it could be informative. So you need to adapt your interview structure based on whatever it is which you're producing as your area of study. So this means that it will include direct question and answers. So you've obviously heard interviews before, whether that be on the news, on the radio. You just need to adapt that structure to dealing with your text. You need to connect the questions and answers together to investigate a certain idea. So you really want to be demonstrating a clear flow between the person asking the question and then the person responding to the question. And you also want to be using some conversational techniques, including hesitations and pauses. This is really going to make sure that your interview sounds realistic and make sure that you actually sound like two people having a conversation in an interview rather than just an essay with an interview structure loosely adapted to it. So, this brings us to the end of our lesson on the area of study essay today. Basically, what we've examined is not only the way in which you can write a normal area of study essay through the structure which we'll be going on to examine in later videos, but the way which you can adapt this essay to different text types which you might be given. So through memorizing this structure and practicing it continually, you're certain to achieve success in your area of study essay.